Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, as the New York Giants continue to muddle their way through this miserable 2024 season, 2-11, 0-7 at home, steamrolling toward the number one overall pick. I have good friend Patricia Traina of New York Giants on SI and Locked On Giants podcast here to give me all of the answers and tell me where it all went wrong. Patty, how are you today? Thanks for hopping on.
Always, Ed, and, it's been a long, long season, my gosh, I feel like I've aged 20 years with this season.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Look, your good friend and my good friend Tom Canavan, 49 years Associated Press, 49 years on this Giants beat, and this season drove him into retirement.
Well, it's interesting because Canavan was the longest tenured beat writer, so now that he's retiring, that leaves Schwartz as the longest, Paul Schwartz of the New York Post is the longest. Guess who's the second longest tenured writer?
It's not me.
Me! Believe it.
It's funny, Patty, because I was in the room the other day, and and we were trying to figure out among those of us who are there regularly, not counting Steve Serby, the Post columnist, who's what is Serby, about 112, but we were trying to figure out if I was the oldest one in the room, and it turns out that Schwartz is the oldest one in the room. He's a year older than I am. So
I
so
never would have guessed.
so well, you never would have guessed that Schwartz is older than I am.
No
Or you,
comment.
Yeah, okay. Let's leave that there, Patty. Let's just leave that there. So, Patty, let me start with this. Obviously, everything that could go wrong with this team pretty this year has gone wrong. And just as an aside, how bad do you feel for Trey Hawkins today? As we record this show, we just found out about an hour ago that Hawkins, coming off the best game of his career, coming off the only interception by a Giants defensive back all year, has a fracture in his back, and he's going to spend the rest of the year on IR. I mean, yeah, you just throw your hands up and you say, what else?
Yeah, I really feel for the kid. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a scary injury. Anything with the back, especially a
Hmm.
fracture, it's like, oh my gosh. And,
Hmm.
certainly prayers up to Trey Hawkins. Hopefully, he's okay.
Hmm.
Right away, you think about, is his quality of life going to change? And hopefully that won't be the case. I don't think it will. But, yeah, just the latest in a string of unfortunate injuries, and you ever notice when the team is just not doing well, it just seems like the injuries just pile on like crazy?
It we see it year after year, and sometimes, Patty, sometimes you just get down to the last couple of weeks of the season, and a guy gets banged up, and if there was more time left in the year, the guy wouldn't go to IR, because the guy will go to IR the last couple of weeks. But these are legitimate injuries that these guys are suffering. I mean, the Dexter Lawrence injury, this one to Trey Hawkins, what we're hearing about Bobby Okereke, um, the reporting on, I think from Dan Duggan of the Athletic, was that Okereke might have a herniated disc in his back, which I feel his pain because I've had that before, and I know what that is. I slept laying flat on a hardwood floor long enough because of a herniated disc on my back, so I know all about that. But these are legitimate injuries. These aren't, oh, this guy's got a hangnail, we're not going to play him because we're tanking.
Yeah, look, it's interesting, I get a lot of people say, "Oh, the tank is on, the tank is on." I can see why people would say that, but me personally, and I say this all the time, I don't believe in tanking. I don't think, in the locker room they believe in tanking. Excuse me. Um, these guys, they're playing hard for Dable still. There's
Mhm.
been 8 games this season, I believe, that have been decided by one score. All right. It's not like the Giants are getting blown out week after week after week. And you try telling an athlete who is coming in, spending hours upon hours weightlifting, resting, getting treatment, studying film, putting his body on the line. You try telling him, "Oh, we have to tank guys because we want a top draft pick." And I don't think that's going to go over very well. And I don't think it's in the Giants' nature. I don't think it's in very many teams, if any team's
No.
nature. And fans, if that's how they want to console themselves by saying, "Oh, the Giants are tanking," well, who am I to just to rain on that parade? But I don't think the team is tanking.
Think what you want, Patty, but they're just not good. They're just not good, and their roster is depleted. Their best offensive lineman is on IR. Their best defensive lineman is on IR. Their number one cornerback is probably headed to IR. Their, Okereke, who's their best linebacker, is probably headed to IR. Their quarterback is now on the Minnesota Vikings practice squad. So, their best tight end is on IR. It goes on and on. And those guys aren't on IR, with hangnails. They're on IR with legitimate injuries. They're just not good, Patty. They're just not good. And anyway, I wanted to ask you, go all the way back to the spring, go all the way back to the summer. And I think both of us felt better about this team. I think neither one of us felt like it was a playoff team, like it was a great team. But just kind of think back. I mean, did you think that there was a legitimate chance that this team would be better than it was last year? That it would be at least mediocre? That it would be competitive? That it would look a lot better than it has?
Oh, absolutely. I didn't think it would be a playoff team, but I thought at the very least, it might be in the hunt for a wild card spot, but certainly I didn't expect it to at this point in the season to have just 2 wins. I mean, that's just
Hmm.
crazy. I
Hmm.
didn't expect all the injuries to happen. I mean, you can never plan for those. Um, but yeah, I thought it would be a lot more competitive. I thought they would have maybe learned from some of the things that held them back the year prior, and I'm talking about from a big picture perspective. So, yeah, I think I initially predicted 9 wins for this team, and my gosh, I gotta get out of the prediction business. I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, I think I predicted 7. I think I can remember. I don't remember who it was, but they were kind of surveying the media room at one point, asking everybody, and I think I took 7. But yeah, but 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, I thought was a reasonable expectation. So the 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 logical question, the extension of that is, do we just blame all of this on quarterback play? Or, where did it all go wrong, Patty? What happened here? How did it all, fall into the proverbial airplane dumpster?
Nice reference there. No, I don't think you blame it all on the quarterback. I mean, was the quarterback play a problem? Yes. Is it still a problem? Absolutely. But there's a bunch of things you could probably point to. You can point to the building of the roster. For example, Joe Shane this past draft didn't draft any offensive linemen, didn't draft any defensive linemen. Well, where are they struggling most nowadays? In the pit. Okay, so
Mhm.
that was a problem. You could maybe look at the decision by Brian Dable on how he doled out preseason snaps, which is something I've been talking about for the longest time. I mean, you don't treat this team like they're the Kansas City Chiefs just coming off of a Super Bowl. This is a team that has struggled, and I get it. You don't want injuries to happen, but look, how many guys have got injured this year, have popped up on the injury report midweek? Okay, so injuries are going to happen whether you're playing preseason, regular season, whether you're practicing on grass, whether you're in the field house, they're going to happen. There's
And
no way that you can avoid them unless you bubble wrap guys. So you could blame that. You can maybe blame some of the decisions that were made. For example, you know, they didn't address cornerback. They tried to, I get it, but, they weren't able to address cornerback, and some of that, that young defensive secondary has been shaky. You look at the run defense, that's been a problem. You look at whether Shane Bowen and his philosophy and scheme is a fit for the talent he inherited. So there's any number of things. You could talk about the offensive line. You could talk about, oh, Saquon Barkley walked out the door. Now where's the offense coming from? You could talk about Malik Neighbors not being involved as much since he's come back from the concussion, him not getting involved right away. So yeah, take your pick. I mean, any answer at this point is probably the right one.
I think all of those I think all of those have a piece in it. The one thing I wanna say is every Giants fans on my website, on my timeline, yeah, everybody moans about the number of injuries and this and that, and yeah, it's a lot. And it seems to be a lot annually, especially when the Giants are bad, but the Giants are not the only team in the league with injuries. I think I looked up the number today, and before Trey Hawkins and before any transactions were announced today, there were 304 players in the NFL on the injured reserve list. There are teams with 18 and 19 guys. I think the Detroit Lions, the best team in the NFC, I think they have 18 or 19 guys on IR. So my only point is, it's not just the Giants that suffer injuries. It's a violent, brutal sport, and it happens.
Yeah, but to your point, Ed, it's not the number of injuries, it's who's getting injured. So,
Hmm.
I don't mean to sound callous here, but if your 4th string cornerback is on IR and your 5th string receiver is on IR, it's a lot different than your 1st team, nose tackle or your 1st string cornerback, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
sometimes, because I go back to 2007, the Super Bowl team, and that year the Giants had 17 guys on IR and they still won the Super Bowl. Well, you look at the list, and a lot of the guys, if I were to rattle off names, people would be like, "Who? That guy was
Right.
on the Giants?" Whereas, this year you've got a lot of recognizable names, Andrew Thomas, you
Hmm.
know, Dexter Lawrence. I mean, the list goes on
Hmm.
and on. So,
You're absolutely right there, Patty. The flip side of that is the Detroit Lions have Aiden Hutchinson on IR. Sometimes it's just the depth of the roster, and if you have the ability to overcome it. But I don't want to belabor injuries too much. What I want to ask you, with all of the issues that the Giants do have, and you hit them all. The everything from the quarterback play to game day roster management to how they handled the preseason. All of that has a hand in it. Does the right quarterback fix all of it? If they can get the right quarterback, in the 2025 off season.
ooh, I think that's a start in the right direction. Um, does it fix everything? I don't think so, because now you've got to ask yourself, okay, do we have the right offensive system in place? Is the offensive line fixed? We look at the start of the season, we could say that the offensive line was decent. It was improved from a year ago, but then again, a year ago, the offensive line was historically bad. You ask yourself, is the defense more, better set up to defend the run so that they don't get into these second and short, third and short situations? I mean, the quarterback is a big piece. I don't think it's the only piece, though.
All right, so let's get into Joe Shane and Brian Dable and their futures. When I did your show, which that will be the Locked on Giants show that I was on, will be up on Wednesday morning as well. So if you folks don't get enough of looking at our beautiful faces here on this show, go on over to Locked On Giants and check that out as well. If you can stand listening to us or looking at us for another half an hour. but uh, but anyway, you asked me basically to make the case whether, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll should stay. And let me just sort of ask the question differently. Look at Let's look at Joe Shane's 3-year tenure. When you look at Joe's 3-year tenure, has in your mind, has he done a good job? And and if he hasn't, or if he hasn't done a good job, or if there's areas where you think he hasn't done well, what would you point to? And if you want to throw in it, if you want to say, whether, if you're John Mara, would you give him a chance to continue? Feel free, but I'm really more interested in you assessing what you think he's done well and what you think he hasn't done well.
Well, I don't think he's done, an A plus job. I wouldn't give him a grade of A plus. I probably would give him a grade of maybe C minus at this point. And I think the biggest issue with Joe Shane is a stubbornness to double down on mistakes that are screaming that they're mistakes. We talked about on my show the offensive line not having a solid plan for backup swing tackle. And now they have to basically plug guys who are career right tackles in at left tackle because they don't have an answer. We can maybe point to the Evan Neal situation. All right. A lot of people, and I'm one of them. I don't know that Evan Neal is a right tackle in this league. I think he should be moved inside the guard to minimize some of the balance issues and whatnot that he has. So there's that stubbornness. You can point to, what they did with the quarterback. I felt, you know, they were talking about, oh, when Daniel Jones is healthy, he's going to be our starter. Really? You didn't want to have a competition? You were just going to hand the job to him? What is this? Don't coaches always say, oh, the more competition, the better? Well, now you have a chance to have a competition, and you have Russell Wilson come in for a cup of coffee, and supposedly they said to him, well, Daniel's going to be our starter once he's healthy. I felt that was a mistake. So little things like that, and then you can point to, the offensive line and his draft picks, which is why I think they hired Chris Snee to hopefully fix that. And if anybody can get that fixed, I think Chris can. You look at, some of the other decisions that they made and some of the other things that they've handled, letting the leadership walk out the door. And Joe's got some growing to do into the role. Now, is he a little bit better than what he first came in here? Yes, but he's still, and he has admitted to this. He said, I've made mistakes, and, he's going to learn from it. It's just a question of whether ownership is patient enough to let him continue cutting his teeth and learning how to really, evolve into a really solid NFL GM.
When you think about Joe, I was thinking about this the other day. Um, some of the history of some of the players that have walked out the door. All right, Saquon being one. Okay, Joe, and we saw on Hard Knocks. Joe basically said, "I'm tired of this. It took too much out of me. I'm not even negotiating with Saquon." This during the 2024 offseason. He said, I'm just going to let him go to free agency, and if we can match, we can match, and if we can't, we can't. And when you go back and you think about it, the same thing happened with Julian Love. They offered Julian Love a contract in the 2022 bye week. Julian Love turned it down. When Julian Love had an offer from the Seattle Seahawks for less money than the Giants had offered him in 2022, Joe refused to match. And it just makes me wonder if, and we talked about the offensive line with the Josh Azudu thing and all of that. Is Joe sometimes too stubborn for his own good, or does he take some of these rejections too personally? It's like, okay, you rejected me, so the heck with it. We're just moving on. Is he a little too stubborn in that way?
I think you're onto something there, actually. I mean, I have never been a fan of GMs who let the market do their negotiating for them. Now, is this a matter of Joe just not knowing the right value for guys? I mean, he made the comment on Hard Knocks regarding Saquon, "Oh, I don't wanna make an offer because I don't wanna piss him off." Since when, we're talking business. Since when do people spare feelings in business? That's
Right.
not a good way to go about it, in my opinion. So I do think that, maybe Joe gets a little flustered when it comes to negotiations that don't go as smoothly. I think, if I remember correctly, he was quick to pull offers off the table rather than leave them on the table. And you can make the argument, well, he took the money off the table because he went and spent it elsewhere. But, how bad do you want these guys at the end of the day? Or are you just cutting off your nose to spite your face and saying, well, you rejected me. So guess what? I'm going to pull the offer off the table and I'm going to take my ball and go home.
I remember Joel Corey telling me when the Giants pulled the offer off the table for Saquon. And Joel Corey, longtime sports agent, now does a lot of cap work for CBS Sports. Um, Joel said that's just not the way it's done. That's an insult to the player, and it's going to drive the player away. So I, you do hope that guys grow into roles. Um, I am a proponent of Joe getting a chance to continue in this job, um, but he has growing to do, and he has mistakes to look in the mirror and assess about the way that he's done things.
Absolutely. I mean, it's maturing in the job. Has he taken steps forward since he's been hired? Yes. Does he have a long way to go? Absolutely.
But I
So, I mean, he's not a dummy. He's really
Mhm.
not. He's an intelligent man, and he legitimately wants to make the best possible decisions for the Giants organization. It's just that sometimes the way he goes about it, you sit there and you shake your head and you say, "Joe, man, what are you doing here?"
Well, I kind of thought the same thing, at this past trade deadline when when he had a price in mind for Aziz Ojolari and for Darius Slayton and couldn't get the price. And okay, fine, you wanted to get a certain price, but there's a very, very strong possibility that you're going to be left holding air in this coming free agency because there's a very strong possibility that neither one of those guys is going to stay. So you may have wanted a fourth round pick and not been able to get it. But maybe that sixth round pick you did get offered is better than trying to hold on to air and holding on to nothing.
Yeah. I
So
mean I mean, look, this is a team that has a lot of holes to fill. What's that saying? Beggars can't be choosy. So why
mhm.
wouldn't you want to load up on draft picks? Because now you're assured of having a draft pick that you can use in 2025, as opposed to, well, maybe we'll get a comp pick that we can use in 2026. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. In the end of the day, you're like, well, he doesn't want to give away the player for nothing. Well, guess what? In essence, if they go and they sign guys, that's exactly what he's done.
Mhm. Yeah, so we both hope that Joe grows into this job and continues to learn and evolve because as you said, he's a smart guy. I think he's put together a good front office and a good scouting staff and a good team around him, and I do hope he grows into the role. Um, I think, Patty, as we talked about on your show, I think the more complicated, the more difficult decision is Brian Dable. Just your thoughts on the pluses and minuses of allowing Brian Dable to continue, beyond the next 4 games.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I feel that Dable's maybe not on as solid ground as Shane. I can make cases for his staying and against him staying. So I will say this. I think you might want to stay the course with him, but you tell him he's got to change some of the things that he's doing that just aren't working. For example, you and I have talked about how they get the team ready for training camp and the regular season. Okay, that's got to change. That's like my number one pet peeve with Brian Dable and how he goes about things. All right. the play calling situation. I understand why he took it over, and I was in favor of it, but let's face it, the offense has been worse. They weren't able to get the best out of Daniel Jones. When Daniel Jones had his best year, Mike Kafka was calling the plays. Okay, now all of a sudden, the following year, Mike Kafka, they take the play calling away from him here and there, and then this year he totally strips it away. So that's an issue. So just little things that, I think Dable has to, if he comes back, if I'm John Mara, if I'm Steve Tisch, I say, okay, Brian, look, we know that you have this history with quarterbacks. However, you weren't able to get Daniel back to where he was in 2022. We'll give you another chance because you were right about Jaden Daniels, you were right about Drake May, but you got to make some changes. And that includes, whether that's giving up the play calling, whether that's changing how he doles out snaps in the preseason, whether that's hiring a new defensive coordinator that's a better fit for the talent they have, whatever the case may be. Because right now, Ed, the processes that Dable has in place are not translating into wins. And he can talk about, oh, we just got to keep working, we just got to keep going back. Well, you know what? After a while, players are going to start to tune that out because they're going to say, well, we're doing the same thing week after week after week, and the results aren't there. So that's something, you've got to take a look at. And I know Dable always says, well, we're always looking and we're always adapting. They can't be adapting much because it's the same
Well,
result week after week.
well, the disturbing thing, Patty, is yes, they're playing hard, but they're not playing well. And it's difficult to argue. It it's really difficult to argue that guys are getting better. And it's difficult to look at 25 accepted penalties in the last 2 weeks. Um, y- you want to see this team play not only with effort but play with some discipline. You had 25 accepted penalties. You had a completely blown coverage that cost the team a touchdown the other day. Um, so it's a very difficult decision, and I honestly I wonder if part of it comes down to I know that John Mara has said he could separate the two jobs. And yet, if you're going to keep Joe, does do you think that if you were to replace Brian Dable, you look at Joe, and I think, standard general manager contracts are 4 years, maybe 5 years. So you can look at, a prospective new head coach could look at Joe Shane and say, he's in the last year of his contract, or he might be in the last year of his contract. I don't know if he was given 4 years or five, to be honest with you. But, he might be on shaky ground. I might not want to go there. So, what kind of candidate is that going to lessen the candidate pool? And does that make you look at, well, if I'm going to keep one, I might as well keep both and let it ride all the way out?
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, I know they've said that Shane and Dable aren't necessarily a package, but I think at this point you raise a good, you raise a valid point here. It's kind of like, I say, well, replace Shane Bowen. But if you're a defensive coordinator, do you really want to come here knowing that it's possible that Dable's going to be out if he doesn't turn this around next year?
Yeah.
So I think you have to kind of stick with the two of them, even though they're not necessarily married or joined at the hip. You stick with them, and then if they don't work out next year for whatever reason, you sweep them both out. And you start all over again. But that's really hard. I think and then there's the other factor. It's like ownership has the final say over the head coach hiring. It's not always the GM. I think back in the day when it was George Young had final say with the blessing of the late Wellington Mara. But these days, I don't believe the GM has the final say over the hiring of the head coach. It goes through ownership. So, if you're Joe Shane and now you have to replace Dable, and it's like ownership likes this guy, but you maybe feel like you can't work with him as well, that's where you can make things worse. And I
right.
know it's a risk, but, it's something you have to take into consideration.
Well, I think you're 100% right there, Patty. We know that, for example, when Dave Gettleman was GM, we know that Joe Judge was not Dave Gettleman's hire. And we know that the Giants kind of sold us a bill of goods for a while and told us how good the relationship between Gettleman and Judge was, because we know that in the end that wasn't the case. There was no relationship, that they had two completely different visions and that was never going to work. But can and I think we know that John Mara more or less allowed Joe Shane to hire the coach that he wanted in Brian Daboll in 2022. I think we know the coach that John Mara would have hired, if it was entirely up to him, I think John Mara would have hired Brian Flores. So can can Joe Shane work with Brian Flores if that was if that was the case? I don't know. I don't know. So maybe you just let this ride all the way out, for another year anyway, and then you like you said, you start over. It's not a good situation, but I I didn't pay for the plane. Malik Neighbors didn't pay for the plane. I don't think license plate guy paid for the plane. Did you pay for the plane, Patty?
I did not.
You did not. But you're Miss Moneybags here with all, yeah, I thought with all your money from Locked On and everything else. I thought you're Miss Moneybags.
Uh, Far from it, man. You're the one who's got the money, man.
I don't know about that either, Patty. I don't know about that. But anyway, 4 more weeks of this, and then we get to spend the next few months arguing over whether it should be Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, if we're not arguing about that already. But I know lots of folks are, so we'll just let them do that for a while. But Pat, I always appreciate it. Giants fans always appreciate you guys giving us your support. So thank you as always for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.